So let's just kind of ease into it, because this will go wherever you feel like it's going to go today, Brad. But just like we were kind of asking before, how's production been? How's everything been going?
The one thing that I would like to say about this production is that I have discovered my one true talent as a director.
Ooh.
And that is that I cast well.
Ah, you do cast well. That's a solid cast.
Yeah, the cast have been on board hardcore since day one, since before day one. And I've said the same thing out in public with people when they ask me about my other productions. And, the last play that I directed, specifically, The Effect, I thought I had the all-star cast. And
that was a solid cast.
Yeah, these guys just even outshine them, believe it or not. So, I mean, it's, they're ready for every rehearsal. They are ahead of lines, most of them. They're asking deep questions. And there's nothing more fun for a director than those, 27 minutes that you linger after rehearsal's over and you promised everybody we'll be done at blah, blah, blah. And blah, blah, blah comes and goes and people just want to keep talking. And it's great because then you really dive, deeper than before, because you get perspective on everything, on where people are coming from, where the actors are coming from, where I'm coming from. And as a group, we've had a really fun time just putting our own ideas into this play and really getting to the heart of what this play is about.
That's fantastic. So I had the privilege of seeing when we all did that community conversation, and there was a scene between mother and son. Right, that's a pretty profound scene for me, just in terms of my own life experience, and and I hadn't really. I'd read it on paper, but seeing it happen is a very different thing. So that was impactful because I saw a connection. I saw energy between the two. I saw a lot of different things. In your own, phrasing, what would you say is emerging there? Like, what have you seen emerge between actors, and in terms of especially that very seminal connection within this story?
Well, that particular scene, strangely enough, at our rehearsal on, I think it was Wednesday, I finally let those two actors in on a little bit of a secret. And that was that it was during that scene when Omari says the line from the Gwendolyn Brooks poem, "We die soon."
Yeah.
And his mother sees him but doesn't see him at the same time. They're actually supposed to be in two different spaces. Omari is just signatory there. He's just representing the poem, in the world of literature. But when she sees him, it opens up this idea that he has been in her head throughout the entire lesson that she's teaching.
Wow.
And that, he's sneaking in because of this, occurrence that's taken place that she's got to deal with. And so we start to see kind of deeply into their relationship from her perspective, her love for him. But what I finally got to there was I told them that it was when I saw that scene play out, at that moment, I burst into tears.
Yeah. When
I first saw this in New York. And that was the moment I knew I had to do this play.
Yeah.
So, because it's going to be really tricky, but if the actors do it absolutely correctly, we've got this way in which they're looking at each other and through each other at the same time. And it really like shows up to the audience that they do and they don't see each other. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it to 2 weeks. Well, we'll see it. But that's what we're really trying to do, is just show that you never really get out of the heads of the people that you love and the people that love you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the two of them are just fantastic together.
They are.
And also Wednesday we added music to that scene.
Ooh.
So
Cool. I got to sit in.
Yeah.
That's right. You were here taking pictures. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit. I mean, I've always expected we'd probably incorporate a little bit of music, but we're going to just run a nice little trap beat underneath that whole scene.
That'll be
and
beautiful.
it's a real laid back little beat, and it really kind of gives you this idea that life is art and art is life, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
I really felt like the actors. I saw them relax.
They did.
Yeah.
They really
I saw
did.
them really be able to. I don't know, that rhythm of the words came
Right.
with that. That wasn't there before.
Right. Yeah. Before, it was teaching a lesson, and what does that look like? Well, we've all sat through lessons, but
Sure.
I think that putting the music on it both gave Omari the sense of, this is lyrical.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
The pace, the rhythm, it was
Right.
there.
And-
He speaks it in that way,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I can imagine. I haven't seen it with the music, so
Yeah.
experienced it. So that sounds great.
It gave her the idea that there's a beat to life too.
Oof.
So I
Well
mean,
put.
it kind of worked. It's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Well, and also to me, when I saw that too, it was almost a heartbeat that was
Mm.
synchronous
Mm.
in that sense. That you're saying for me as an audience member, seeing as a mother and an audience
Mhm.
member, that whole scene is like you speak into these lives that are with you for moments in time.
Yeah.
That the heartbeat is always there.
Mm.
So let's do that then, because I think you both went there in terms of personal effects. So Brad, let's shoot back to New York, right? When that hit you kind of center chest.
Yeah.
What was the experience like? What I mean, and this is of course relating to as an educator, as an individual who's seen equity and inequity, and who's seen access and lack thereof in spaces that may likely have felt very, in which you may have felt powerless, may have felt that you had some agency. I'm not sure, but in the sense of that lens, seeing it at that time, whenever you did this particular production through the eyes of an educator, how did that hit you? Describe that.
Well, it put me in the shoes of the parents that I deal with for the first time. I mean, the story is about Naya, who is a teacher, and so we get that. But I think what more so does brilliantly is she puts multiple lives in one character. Because theater these days, we don't have, we're not Shakespeare writing 30-person plays anymore.
Yeah.
If you really want to do something powerful and impactful and you want to have the best of the best, you keep it to a 4, 5, 6-person cast. And, Naya represents both the education system and a parent who has their child in that education system, or a similar education system. So what I really saw was, I just kind of, and this is going to come off as overly blunt, and I'm not as callous as I'm going to make myself out right now.
Okay.
But I kind of, I was able to stop having my first thought about kids with problems be that their parents could fix all of this. And my first thought about kids with problems is that they were just kids.
Right.
And that the parents have problems, and the parents have issues, and everybody has issues, and I have issues. Why couldn't I take on parents as some of the most challenged people in society? I'm not a parent myself. And so I think that, part of my own looking at it was really, really blind to everything that it takes just to raise a child.
Yeah.
And then you add on top of that a minority child in a fairly, unconscious world. Then you have people with issues that there are no guidebooks for. There's no self-help to teach you how to deal with a world that couldn't give a crap.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just, it made me realize that patience will be way more appreciated 99% of the time than pushing.
Yeah.
And she has that challenge also that many parents have, and that's being single, a single mom, and a single minority mom. And she made some very hard choices to go into an inner city school, and she didn't have to, but that was a choice. So,
Right.
and her, as a woman, the strength that she shows, the strength to ask the questions, I appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you brought up this idea of being able to see a child, a student's context as something that extends all the way around, like especially in certain kind of cultures that we may come across. I've seen it similarly in very urban populations as well as in very rural populations, that idea of it takes a village to bring a child up. And that's how I was raised. I mean, there must have been like 9 different adults in my life because everyone was doing something else: grandparents, aunts, uncles, mother, father. Sometimes mother, father was least on that list, or more often than not. That resonates in a very important way with as another function of this whole project that we're doing. Ann and I recently did a podcast with a friend who was an educator in New York, who grew into, over the course of 15 years, into assistant principal of a school that was, I mean, I don't know how we can characterize such a thing, but for all intents and purposes, a pipeline school, right? And she turned that around, and one of the seminal aspects of her approach when they essentially dumped her into the school was, you do something with this. And it was the idea that she had that kind of dissonant moment as you did as well, and said, whoa, I don't think I'm looking at this in the way that I could. And she started to do something on the ground and in real time that we talk about often just in concept and theory, which is look at the whole student, right? Look at that experience, all the kind of emotional, social, cultural effects that are impacting this one human being.
Right.
So in that sense, and this is something I posit to both of you, right, as director and as, which I always try to say with a straight face, but as consulting scholar for this particular production, I very much enjoy that title. I wish I could put that over my forehead at this point, yeah. But the idea that there is an intention for both of you behind this project and to bring it to life, let's kind of dive a little bit into that idea of what intention drove you to choose this production, Brad, at this time, and how is it relevant for you to make this come to life at this moment?
At this time, I'm not sure that at this time is really, a part of the real question.
Okay.
I put this in as soon as I saw it.
Wow.
As soon as I saw it, I think I texted Steve in Butler.
Wow.
From 8th Avenue.
Wonderful.
In New York.
Yes.
Just about to stop into a little sushi restaurant and grab some late night sushi.
Perfect.
And I was headed back to my hotel. I think I texted him right then and just said, I've got next year's headliner.
Wow.
I've got the best thing we're going to do next year.
Yeah.
And not to say that it's all about me or being good or being best or being whatever. Just this play is so darn good. I just knew that we could make it fly, and I knew that we had to give it a try. It was just becoming available at the beginning of this season, I believe, for amateur theaters to do. And I really wanted to be first.
Sure.
But somebody in Detroit got me. So
That's
I think it was
okay.
Detroit. It might have been Detroit. It might have been Louisville. But one of those places actually put it on back in like August or something. So.
But again, context matters, right? And in this particular space in Gainesville, Florida, and the state of Florida, this is that's kind of what I was alluding to with the idea of at this time, because this is.
Well, then what I'll say is this: I came to work at the Actors Warehouse with this really nice hope that my work here would be multi-dimensional, multiracial casts, when traditionally maybe things weren't. And I really wanted my first show, which was The Effect. I wanted to have a multiracial cast for that, because it hasn't been done that much. There have been productions of that particular show that had like one person of color and blah blah blah, but traditionally it's mostly white. And I kind of wanted to throw that on its ear, like maybe have one white person, and whatever. And for all intents and purposes, I really didn't have a whole lot of people of color come out for that show. And when it came down to casting the show, I went with just the best people available. And it happened to be, all white and or, we had a Latino actor. But so when I was in New York, when I saw this show, I had heard about it and I figured it would be good. But I saw that and I said, this is how we get into it. We start with this, and we build upon getting people to know at least my brand, I guess, if you want to call it that. Or just, the way that I work in theater, and, maybe that will bring more of an audience around for future auditions and whatnot.
Absolutely, which is incredibly necessary, and that I'm glad you said it that way, because especially in the context of, as I'm throwing this to you, Ann, in the sense that this is also an effort to engage this particular community, and the community of Gainesville, Florida, is a unique community because there's great diversity, there's great kind of plurality in terms of the types of perspectives that come here, but they kind of come from one particular space, which is academics and professional spaces and whatnot. But this is also a city that has been traditionally very marked over the past even century or near to there with very tense racial dynamics. So there's a big focus in this city at this point, which is reflected in other spaces as well, but mostly kind of smaller tier 3 cities like this, towards truth and reconciliation with communities that are still incredibly and observably and so kind of unbelievably segregated, right, as this city is in terms of one side of a particular main thoroughfare and the other. So in your capacity to really work through this play, which is the second part of a series through this Black American Experience or American Black Experience project, how is Pipeline impactful to you in terms of your intention for engaging the community around these particular issues?
This is an unusual project for me because I usually direct as well as include a small initiative towards community engagement. This really, Stephen came to me and asked me to do the whole community engagement over 2 plays and trying to connect the two and the then and now thing. But ever since, and I've only been in Gainesville 2.5 years, especially in the theater community, and directed for a couple of different initiatives in different theaters. But I think I've noticed that there is that dividing line, the racial division. Of course, we're in the South. I predominantly work in the South, and it's very prominent here. So I think with Pipeline, it struck me as something that is can be. I wanted it to be incredibly personal. I wanted to make the issues surrounding it not talking points, but personal stories. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I landed when I started thinking about these initiatives. Our other play, Colored Door at the Train Station, really was a little bit more general. We could talk about We can talk about history. We can talk about Black history because it was centered on that. But Pipeline is personal. But I think we tend to land on, you know, it is talked about as a theory, you know, the pipeline theory. And I'm like, it's not a theory, it's these kids' lives.
Yeah.
And where does it land for everyone? Because it's everybody's story. We are affected by this. And that's why I really wanted to work with these community conversations. And what's coming out of them is really amazing when we start talking to these individuals. I wish that was a whole lot broader, especially in age. We tend to get more retired people who are very thoughtful, and I'm very thankful that they come out, but I would love to hear stories from the African American community. I would love to hear more stories from young people who actually live this and walk this. So I think I'm hoping that people see this on the stage, and that the thing about Morisot's work is that she is personal. She's incredibly personal, and she does it in 90 minutes. And there's no way anyone can see this show without feeling that, the heart of it, the heart of the story, and seeing themselves in the story, no matter what color they are, no matter what nationality, no matter anything. But when you feel the mother's desperation and fear, when you feel the confusion of the son, when you know, all the things that roil in this whole thing, you can't walk away without it becoming a personal story.
Yeah, I like that. That's important because, you know, the prior production of The Colored Door, it was a historical narrative. It definitely there was a distance, you know, that sometimes, as we discussed at that time, makes it safer for people to engage in this idea of, you know, considering what there is relative to the kinds of issues or the themes that come out of it. It's a safer space to do so. Pipeline doesn't feel like that. It's very present. It's very in the moment. And it is something that I'm curious about. So I'll throw this to you, Brad, in the sense that when I was doing this work around The Colored Door, there was a very clear kind of intersectionality between race, gender, and identity. I mean, 3 different dynamics that were coming into play. If we could compartmentalize your view on Pipeline, the kind of the themes that emerge from it, the themes you've seen through the production at this point, what would you say are the main kind of the domains that come together in terms of what you're seeing emerge?
Well, I think that more so, and this is coming from almost every rehearsal, we find just layers and layers, just depth of meaning to the words, to the scenes, to the action. And I think that what Morso does better than a lot of writers that I've read recent works, is that she says one thing, and the way she says something allows for many different interpretations to come out of it.
True.
If there is an overarching aim, it's got to be the inner city. It's got to be segregation. The segregation between public and private schools, cities, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that this is absolutely an only Black issue, obviously. And the schools that are represented by this play are schools that have, all sorts of races attending their school. But certain schools, because of predominance of one race or another, or because of predominance of past productivity, lack of, for failure, whatever you want to call it, have kind of just been allowed to stew. Allowed to get away with not really getting much done educationally, allowed to be kind of just this breeding ground for events that get a kid in trouble and start them down a path. I think that one of the problems that we come up with throughout the course of trying to figure out this play is that even some children, even just forcing them to be in school Monday through Friday is just too much for them. Yeah. Some kids, it's hours, maybe let them go to school for 4 hours a day instead of 6 or instead of whatever. I mean, and it's not as if more so says it. It's just that that's another thing that we start to see. Like at the end, we see, toward the ends of the play, we see this list. We see this beautiful list of what a student expects or needs just from people in order to be okay with emotions, with feelings, with just day-to-day life. And this list is very honest and straightforward, and it's the kid takes responsibility for himself, says, I need space. Yeah. I need to chill sometimes. I need to be pushed occasionally, but sometimes you need to know when to leave me alone. So it's just like this list is really honest, and I dare anybody to see that list read and not associate that with your own life. Mm-hmm. Don't we all need time to sit, time to stop, time to back off? Yeah. And I think that just the forcing of kids into a situation where, I'm going to speak very bluntly again. Here we go.
Do it.
When they are forced into a situation where they almost can't succeed, and they get passed along through a system that's barely teaching them how to read, and then by the time they reach high school, expects them to write essays and read well and understand on their own, and carry on mature adult conversations about real issues, and they can barely read. Yeah. When that system does that to a child and then forces them to fail for 6 straight hours a day, then I can see when a kid says, this is punishment for me. When a kid says, this is not something I need. As a young educator, I very much thought everybody can. Simply will they? And, it did not take long for me to realize that that's not true. But as I've, gone throughout my career, I think I've just kept that with me, that most people can. Okay, well, a plurality of people can. And then when you really dig deep, especially with the fact that a lot of kids have gone through schools that barely are teaching anything, they're just babysitting them, basically. Yeah. We get to high school and maybe half can. Yeah. And if half can, what are we doing for the rest of it? And if we could do something better, why shouldn't we? Why couldn't we pour some money into this system, pour some effort, pour some training, pour something, and make it worthwhile to everybody involved to do their best? It seems as if there's almost no deep incentive anymore. And yet places like Florida, if you drop out before you're 18, you can't even have a driver's license. Yeah. They take away your driver's license if you're not in school. Well, what if somebody, I don't even have to say the what if. You can think of the what if. Ann can think of the what if. And everyone listening can think of the what if. What if there was something better? Yeah. And I think that's what more so is trying to say. It's certainly part of what I'm trying to put out there is just this idea that the education of a child starts with figuring out who that kid is, not just how old they are, not just that's a big part of it.
But you have to have set up a system that has the resources to do that. We live in a knee-jerk world that just has to do that. whatever's easiest, whatever's expedient.
And I'll say this too, easiest and expedient is the key for most public schools, because I mean, in almost any public situation, you designate enough money to just get the job done.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the system that is in place is easy for about half the students, and it's really, really difficult for about half, because they're basically teaching to the middle.
Yeah.
And for the ones that it's difficult for, it's for a myriad of different reasons. Either they can't do it at all, they just have some sort of deficiency, or they have, I cannot tell you how many students I've seen who are way, way more intelligent than they act or give themselves credit for, but they just don't have the patience to put up with a system that really only kind of teaches one way. Really only, it teaches at a class.
Yeah.
But your average teacher, I have a feeling, teaches at people rather than with them or to them.
And I think that's the tragic thing about where a lot of the funding goes in schools. I mean, this is my pitch for the arts. We've cut out the very thing that can have some sort of impact in an individual child's life, in their ability to find out who they are, in their ability to cope with things, in their ability to find a way to develop into who they're supposed to be. And we don't give opportunity for that.
Right.
And that's why I left being a particular type, being an English teacher, and moving into being a theater educator, because it gave me the opportunity to see children change and to see ways to make a difference, a very solid, exponential almost difference in the kid. Because you see, they can find themselves. They also can find a community. They can find
Like-minded people.
Like-minded people. They are accepted. Whereas, sure, there are other things in school that can give you that, but let's give them everything.
Right. Yeah, it's not going to be an algebra class.
It's not. It's not.
I mean,
Or an English class.
as much as algebra has its place and absolutely will teach you to think critically, it's not going to develop the whole man.
It's not. It's not.
So there's something that really emerged. I mean, I think, and this is kind of let's consider it kind of the peak of how we can. I mean, it's the work that both of you are doing, the work that Morisot has done to develop this narrative, to develop this story. And you said it well, Brad, in the sense that it's not explicitly stated, but it's probably done in the way that it needs to be done to make people think. Because I think coming at this particular issue with too fine a point definitely leads more likely than not to just policy and statistics, and we don't have the funding, and we can't do this, and it's all too big, and it's all too difficult. And those are the more known ways of coming to, I won't say understanding, but a lack of understanding around this particular topic. But what seems to have really emerged well, that both of you have said, and you complemented each other so well, that really stuck with me, is this idea that when we think of pipeline, it's a singular concept, right? There is a pipeline, and we know what that means, and we know what that connotes. And then there is the idea of standardizing education. In Florida, it's a very big push. There's the teach at students, teach to the test. There is one way of doing things. There is one path. And if you don't fit into that path, then you are in a dire place, because, as you said, there's a very strong, it's like the middle of the line distinction. 50% can and 50% likely cannot by the time they reach a certain age group, and that then writes their story. So even in that sense, the way of, I have a third grade kid who is currently now, I didn't think I would have a child at age 9 who would begin to have test anxiety, but the FSA exam is coming in April and May, and he's already, I'm trying to teach him coping skills. I didn't think I would have to do that. I felt that when I was taking the SAT when I was 16, you know, and even that was kind of stressful at that time. So the idea here is that there is this one-size-fits-all perspective on both sides of this continuum in terms of what school means. And I wonder, when you said, can we do it better, is it perhaps a more palatable or graspable way in to say, can we do it differently, in the sense that, is there the potential to educate people differently in terms of how the time frame of a day or a week exists, in the way that we even in the types of knowledge that are gained. You know, there's discrete knowledge, there's applied knowledge, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, and yet the approach to this hits a very strong, I don't know if it's necessarily socioeconomic, racial, like sociocultural, I'm not sure, but maybe it's all of the above, that it hits a nerve in the sense that, well, we can't talk about that because that is racist, or that is disenfranchising to certain populations. So instead, there is this, we'll give all the opportunity to everyone, but we don't really reflect on what opportunity that is. Is it built for everyone? Is it taking into consideration the kinds of divides that are inherent, they're systematic in our culture? So that is what I see emerging from this particular production and all the community engagement that is developing around it. So I put that to you in the sense that, have those kind of questions, even in the core cast, even in the way that you all have found your way to internalizing this story and delivering it for all of us to internalize as well, have these types of issues come up? What's the kind of, I guess the easiest way is, what's the kind of cognitive dissonance that's emerged for the cast members? I mean, that's interesting to me as well, in terms of getting into these characters with these issues.
Well, a lot of what you've described, I could talk about for an hour.
We could do that in other podcasts as well.
But that's not really exactly what Pipeline's bringing up.
Right.
I mean, it'll bring that up in certain people's minds, certainly. But the real way in which I think, I don't want to speak for the cast, but I think that the way that we're seeing this as an entire company is that the fear of the public school system for certain areas of our society is already there. It's built in. The main character of this play sends her child to a private school, even though she teaches at a public school. Yeah. She teaches in a public school in the neighborhood that she's from. And it's never really said exactly where they're from, but we're imagining some, urban center in the Northeast. They mention Philadelphia, but that's not the city that they're in. So the fear is there. It's like, it's known to be a pipeline. It's known to be a place that will push your buttons if you've got buttons to be pushed, and then you will do something that will get you kicked out, get you thrown in juvie, get you thrown in jail. Because all it really takes is one fight. Mm-hmm.
Not anything.
Well, to get kicked out, it probably takes a little bit more, but fight is the most common thing that'll really get you tossed in jail. If you're a 16, 17-year-old, you'll, 15, 14. I started my teaching career at the Alachua Juvenile Detention Center.
Mm-hmm.
And a murderer, a suspected murderer, came in on day 3 of that school year. And day 5, there was a fight between 2 sharpened pencil wielding 17-year-old 6'1" guys. Yeah. So I know what a lot of these the characters in this play are going through. I've seen it, but it's just any little thing. And when you add that on top of the fact that the system that they're forced to be in all the time, Monday through Friday, and that some are forced to be in because they're not going to eat breakfast or lunch if they don't go. But they're forced to be in this system that's going to push all their buttons. And so it's just like, it's almost like a checklist. We just go through this checklist until you either pass your way out or you fail your way to jail. And that's scary. It's scary that we've got such an either-or mindset about it. That's what we see. And that's what a lot of people are afraid of. And that's why they pull their children out of the public schools and put them into private schools. The second biggest point that's being made by this play, however, is that most of the time, a private school isn't an automatic answer. A child that has issues that need to be dealt with still is going to have those issues, even when they go to whatever school it is that they go to. And if you ignore those issues stay. Those issues remain. Those issues might get magnified in a public school where there's a lot more chaos, a lot more seemingly acceptance of rowdy, bad attitudes, whatever you could name, all sorts of things you could name there. But the child is still the child. And so issues that are within the child are going to remain regardless of where they go to school. So the question becomes something along the lines of, when will the people who are paying the taxes for this school to exist stand up and demand more? Stand up and say, I've got to have more, get more involved, demand more involvement of their friends and neighborhood colleagues and cousins and uncles and everybody. And it's not just in those schools, but you got to know that there's got to be a conversation about that going on. This play would not be written if it hadn't. But that conversation is, it's slow, because what government agency is going to want to pour money into education? There's no bottom line dollar sign that you can see out there somewhere that's going to, convince a government that this is a good idea.
Well, I think a lot of it is ignorance of the people who can actually make a difference if we really, I look at what, Parkland has done to gun control. It's those kids who are standing. I'm not saying that in this necessarily is an answer, but I think it's across the board. We have to stand up for the idea that our schools are becoming prisons. I mean, they look like prisons now. They're, they want to arm teachers. I mean, all of these things are ridiculous. And somebody has to start saying, no tolerance to that. And to be able to, but people don't know about it in the sense, or they don't want to know about it. They don't understand it.
It's almost as if your child can survive it, then it was fine.
Yeah.
And that's just
or move to a different neighborhood.
Right. Well, it's odd you said that, because, I know a town in Georgia that when I lived there was somewhat mixed racially, not greatly mixed racially, but somewhat. And the last few times I've been there, I've talked to people, and I've realized that it has completely segregated itself again. And that everybody of one race has moved to this one side of a certain boundary, and everybody of another race has basically stayed or taken what's available in all the places that the white flight has occurred in. And, the white flight all moves to one particular area of the county. And it's just, if that's happening in just the town that I'm from, then it's got to be happening all over America.
It is.
And
it's happening here.
Yeah. Well, here, my experience of here it's always been this way.
Yeah.
Except 20 years ago, there were neighborhoods within a nice long golf shot of where we're sitting, where you'd be afraid to walk through,
Yeah.
no matter who you were. And you could just see that there was probably just fear in those people just living in those neighborhoods.
Right.
And I don't see quite as much of that. And some of that has been, I think the county or the city have tried to clean some of that up, but at the same time, how do we have food deserts?
I know.
How do we have literally anybody in this county can say, well, the east side of Gainesville, and everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That, I mean, if we didn't,
And that brings up an interesting point to kind of, I think, we should, as we round this kind of narrative out and this exchange out, this idea that the concept of the pipeline, I mean, it extends beyond the space of the school. It's actually, like you mentioned, food deserts. I mean, it's food insecurity is just one of several. I mean, transportation is another. Mm-hmm. There is this idea that there is a pipeline for communities as well. And then, as I'm thinking about it, I mean, I just posit this idea that we have a very distinctive idea, and we're exploring a very distinctive idea through this production and this project about pipeline. We know what we're talking about here, but could it be that, I mean, is there more than one pipeline, in the sense that there are different tracks that different individuals, like even when you mentioned white flight, that's a beautiful idea. It's not a beautiful idea, but it's a beautiful idea relative to painting this picture that is then another pipeline where, ostensibly there are different stresses, there are different stressors, I should say, or pressure points that students then face in that particular space, moving to wherever they're expected to go. So it's really this idea of, on a very kind of meta level, what is this institution of education really supposed to be about? What are we doing with it? Traditionally, it's always been argued back and forth that, well, it represents a sorting function in society. So it's kind of doing that well right now, even if it's in a very haphazard and unintentional way, or unplanned, or I don't know, maybe it's well planned. Who knows? We can go from, any side of that, because there's also the privatized prison industry that is making hand over fist in terms of revenue, and maybe in a very dark way, those individuals don't want to see this particular pipeline go away because it is dollar signs at that point. So, I mean, without getting too conspiratorial about stuff like that, the idea is, do you feel, Brad, to kind of, lay kind of the cherry on top of the sundae for this particular discussion, is there a question that Pipeline, the play, asks about the purpose of education in this country?
The purpose of education in this country, if there's a question that this play is trying to raise,
yeah,
man, that's a good one. I'm not absolutely sure that there's a question it's trying to raise.
Mm-hmm.
I think and I don't want to speak for anybody, but this is just my reading, obviously, of this.
Sure.
But I think that this play is tired of questions. And I think that this play is trying to offer just a little bit of hope that there are answers.
Yeah.
And that you've got to absolutely do everything you can at every level all the time. If there's anything that has really, really gotten between that bottom half that I told you about and their education, I really think it's wealth disparity.
I do too.
And it's
a question of power.
It's the fact that the families of that bottom half have no time, after trying to put food and clothing on their children's back and in their bellies, they have no time left to raise a student. They've barely got enough time to raise a young man or a young lady, or a person.
Yeah.
And maybe there are even some of them failing at that too. But they're it's so hard at this point without an education to make enough money for your family to survive that adding education to that mix is almost, it's for so many people, it's just not going to work. It's not gonna work when so many jobs in this country are minimum wage and low wage. And just check out the numbers. If you go back and look throughout history at average salaries for different jobs, you'll find that high professional salaries for doctors, lawyers, maybe not accountants, I don't know, but for the highest of the high, and especially, business-minded professionals, let's put it that way. Those salaries have gone up at a level that is 2 standard deviations away from the norm, away from teachers, for example. I looked at 1955 versus now a few months back, and I think that your average teacher salary, if it had grown with inflation, would currently be $138,000.
Wow.
And that tells you something right there.
Yeah.
We used to pay teachers a living wage, a good living wage. Yeah. Because if a teacher was making $138,000 right now, they could all buy a really nice house, drive a nice car, blah, blah, blah. And that's just not the way it is. Your average teacher salary now is less than $50,000.
Yeah.
What happened to that?
Yeah.
Why do doctors now make $300,000 when 20 years ago they were making $100,000? Why is everybody else tripled?
Yeah.
Why have these certain areas of society, their wealth, their average income has gone way up?
Yeah.
And you're starting to see a little bit of drop off in the law profession.
Yeah.
I have students who are coming out of law school saying they can barely find a job.
Yeah.
When they find a job, they're making way less than the old days of, what was that movie with Tom Cruise where he's getting recruited out of Harvard and they're like, we'll give you $141,000, we'll give you $150,000.
The firm, right? Yeah.
Yes, the firm. Well, that apparently is gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have several former students who have gone through law school, and they're coming out saying it's hard to find a job now.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you have a certain level of people whose income is guaranteed to rise throughout time to meet time's expectations, i.e., inflation, and a certain group who are not, there you see how society values people.
Absolutely.
And we don't value teachers.
Yeah.
We certainly don't value a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Okay? I preach one thing in my classroom more than anything else. Do something where you can pay yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Find something to do in your life where you are your boss, and you can set your salary. Because if you settle for the salary that the world will give you, you'll be frustrated your whole life.
Yeah.
And that might not be true for 1 or 2 or 3 people in there, but for most students, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And so I try to tell them that. I'm just like, don't be afraid to take a risk. Don't be afraid to start a business. Don't be afraid to start a franchise and just earn some money for a while. And, work a job that gets you somewhere stable, somewhere where you can put what you know and who you are to work for you.
Yeah.
Because if you're working for the man your whole life, you're going to be downtrodden fast. It takes a special, special person to go to work for somebody else for 40 straight years.
Nobody does that anymore.
Yeah.
The average is you change your occupation 4 times in a lifetime now. Mm-hmm. But I think what I like about this particular play is the fact that it's not trying to answer a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because every time you go in to try to answer a question in this play, when I've read it or even seen parts of it, it confounds me because, it's not necessary. They're fairly affluent family. Mm-hmm. They're not your typical, but yet they struggle with something so inherent and so difficult. which does have to do with the inherent difficulties of race, of disparity, of poverty, and historic things that we have not grappled with yet. So I think this play will really keep people talking.
Yeah.
Which it should.
And I mean, I think this is this particular exchange that we've had is indicative of that there is, even in this type of kind of emergent realization that just we three have had, and I think this will translate to everyone who listens to this particular podcast in anticipation of seeing Pipeline, which we certainly have now realized is a can't miss experience. It's as you said, Brad, there is a hope that is emerging out of this, right? And for me, just being able to sit down, I think it was one of it's your assistant director that had once said this in another production that we'd had, that he likes, this was about the previous production Boy, in which you were, the roles were somewhat different, and was directing. You were, played a wonderful role in that particular production, but that was around transgender justice. And this individual, Jorge, he said that this is the type of production that necessitates a kitchen table conversation around these issues, and I think this is slated to do that on such a higher level. This is a remarkable, narrative. So, Brad, I thank you from 8th Street to here, like you have, or 8th Ave to here. You've definitely you've brought this to life. That's fantastic, and that includes me at that point. I'm looking forward to all the engagement that comes in around this, especially following those 2 matinee shows, I guess, that we have an opportunity to really engage the cast and the community together. So I think that's going to be some very interesting dialogue that'll occur there, some interesting discourse. So thank you both. This was awesome.